Greetings, sisters and brothers, comrades, friends. Welcome to African History Club, episode number 25. I'm your host, Milton Alimadi. I want to welcome all new patrons that have joined us since the last episode of our podcast. Today, I'm going to be taking a closer look at the 1966 coup d'etat against the government of Kwame Nkrumah, the first prime minister and later president of Ghana. Of course, we did a podcast focusing on Nkrumah in the past, but today I'm going to do something different. I'm going to be reading from documents available at the history site of the State Department, the U.S. State Department. And it includes correspondence coming from the CIA, coming from the State Department, and coming from the U.S. Embassy in Accra, Ghana. Nkrumah really became a target after a speech that he made at the United Nations in September 1960. And I'm going to go briefly through that speech. That speech I would compare to what happened to Patrice Lumumba in Congo. When Patrice Lumumba made that famous speech, June 30, 1960, when Congo won its independence from Belgian colonial rule. And King Baudouin of the Belgians was also in what was then Leopoldville, became Kinshasa, to oversee the process of decolonization and Congo's independence. So after King Baudouin made his speech about how his illustrious ancestors were in terms of being on a civilizing mission to uplift the Congolese, and they'd done a phenomenal job in terms of their colonial enterprise in Congo. And then, of course, Patrice Lumumba got up and he set the record straight, and he recalled the suffering, the immense suffering of the Congolese during Belgian colonial rule. For viewers that are not familiar, Belgian colonial rule oversaw the death of an estimated 10 million Congolese. So obviously, Lumumba was not going to let that just slide. And he confronted King Baudouin with his speech. And it's widely believed that with that speech, Lumumba became a marked man, and that was in effect his death sentence. The same thing really applies to Kwame Nkrumah when we look at his UN speech. So I'm going to read briefly through that, and then I'm going to go to the State Department documents, and I'll read through some of them. And then at the end, I will post links to this podcast so people can also access Lumumba's speech, Patrice Lumumba's speech, as well as Kwame Nkrumah's speech, and then the documents from the State Department as well. And in one of my next podcasts, I'll also do a similar approach to South Africa. And in South Africa, I will examine the role that the United States played in propping up the destructive apartheid regime for decades in South Africa. So I'll also look at some State Department documents dealing with South Africa. All right, so let's start with the Nkrumah speech at the UN. And that speech was September 23, 1960. And essentially what Nkrumah said was that this was now a new era in Africa. And Nkrumah obviously wanted to unite Africa, create a United States of Africa. And had Nkrumah lived, it's quite possible that Africa today, a United States of Africa, would actually be a superpower. And it's obvious that is one of the reasons why the United States did not want another competing global power to emerge in Africa. That was one of the reasons also why Kwame Nkrumah was eliminated from the world historical stage. I just want to look at one economic variable here to show you what might have happened had Kwame Nkrumah not been removed from the historical stage. In 1962, and this is going by World Bank data, and of course, as many of you know, the World Bank has acted as a chief enemy of Africa and other developing countries. But it doesn't mean we cannot look up at the data that they have compiled over the years. So if you look at the gross national income per capita in 1962, Ghana was $190. China was $70. So Ghana was well over 2 times that of China's, approaching 3 times. That's in 1962. And just as a point of reference, the United States was $3,280. All right, let's look at 2019. The same World Bank data. Ghana, 2,220, which is actually one of the best performing economies in Africa. But still, let's look at where China is by 2019. 10,410. We're talking almost 5 times that of Ghana. What happened in that time frame? Well, obviously, China took control of its destiny. China is no longer the playing ground of Western imperialism as Africa remains today in the 21st century. And that's the difference. And that's why I say, had Nkrumah's plan and his vision of African unity materialize, Africa possibly would not be the playing field for Western imperialism. And ironically, China is also one of the new economic exploitators of Africa today in the 21st century. And that is why Nkrumah really is an individual, a leader that is worth revisiting on more than one occasion. And that is why I'm taking a closer look at the U.S. role in getting rid of Nkrumah in 1966. All right, so in the 1960 speech at the UN, Nkrumah is talking about how Belgium was continuing its imperialism by undermining Congo's independence, by intervening militarily, by promoting the secession of the Katanga region, the copper-rich Katanga region, and promoting Moise Tshombe as a puppet installed by Belgium and supported by Belgium and the United States as well. And he's also taking a wider look, looking at other areas. So he's looking, for example, at the Algerian War of Independence and also admonishing the French for prolonging that bloody war of liberation in Algeria. He's also condemning the French for continuing nuclear tests in the Sahara Desert without the involvement or approval of any of the African countries. He's condemning Portugal's continued obstinance in terms of not granting independence for its colonies in Africa at a time when both Britain and France were already in the process of negotiating and had accomplished decolonization in many African countries. And as viewers, some of you may be aware that in the Portuguese colonies of Mozambique, Angola, Guinea-Bissau, Africans had to ultimately take up arms and fight wars of liberation that lasted until 1975. And Nkrumah was also talking about the UN's hypocrisy. The UN had been invited by Patrice Lumumba to help put down the Belgian-promoted secession, which had also invited the participation of multiple militias, including mercenary troops, European mercenaries recruited from South Africa by Moise Tshombe to fight on behalf of his secessionist region. And Nkrumah is saying basically, Lumumba invited the UN to help maintain Congo's unity, but the UN was ignoring all of these rebellious forces and allowing them to in fact consolidate and promoting the breakup of the Congo. And then he's also talking about the war in Vietnam. At that time, he was saying that the Geneva Accord, the Geneva Agreement, which had been signed in 1954, should really be allowed to take hold with the reunification of Vietnam. And that's also at a time, of course, when the US had still not escalated its involvement in Vietnam. So we can see why the US took a very hostile position to this very common sense speech, actually, by Nkrumah at the United Nations. I just want to read from one part of that speech by Kwame Nkrumah. Quote, "The responsibility of keeping the Cold War out of the Congo, and for that matter, out of Africa, rests squarely on the United Nations. This responsibility, as far as the Congo is concerned, can only be discharged if the United Nations acts promptly and realistically in the present situation there, it is impossible to ignore the realities of continued Belgian intervention in the Congo in defiance of the Security Council resolution, unless such intervention is promptly and effectively checked, and the private armies of all sorts now operating in the Congo eliminated by the United Nations, there will be no end to the chaos and confusion which now reigns in the new state. And of course, Nkrumah was absolutely right. And ironically, when the 21st century and Congo has never really recovered from that process, the dismemberment of the Congo, the assassination, the brutal murder of Patrice Lumumba in January 1961. And in that speech, Nkrumah also made another point, which I'm sure the United States did not take kindly to. And he insisted that the People's Republic of China should be made a member of the United Nations. That was in 1960. China did not become a member of the UN until October 25, 1971, at which time Taiwan was then expelled as a member of the United Nations. So immediately, the US took a very hostile position toward Nkrumah and his government after this speech. So I want to read briefly from one of the earliest documents. This document is by Vaughn Ferguson, who is the Director of Office of West African Affairs at the State Department. And it's addressed to the US Ambassador William C. Flake, October 13, 1960, a few weeks after Nkrumah's speech. Quote, his performance at UN session made most unfortunate impression in this country because it reflected a complete lack of appreciation of Western position on almost every issue, and while consistently critical of West, failed to find fault with flagrant unilateral Soviet intervention in Congo. By actions as well as words, Nkrumah seemed determined to abet Soviet cause. Under these circumstances, and given adverse reaction many other African states to his performance, we do not wish to take action to encourage Nkrumah's role in Africa unless and until he shows greater signs of stability and that his actions are not furthering Soviet objectives in such matters as Congo and UN machinery. This does not mean, however, that our relations with Nkrumah or GOG, which stands for Government of Ghana, should be any less cordial than heretofore. And we hope frequent personal contact will make Nkrumah realize where his interests lie and make him aware he cannot indefinitely take one line in private with us as he did with President and a completely opposite line in public as he did at GA. And GA, of course, is General Assembly. Nkrumah has a grandiose part he is to play in future Africa. Resistance and resentment, his leadership attempts growing in Africa, and we hope counterforce such as Nigeria will now begin assert strong moderating influence on manner in which regional cooperation is achieved. So now the US is also promoting division amongst African countries by wanting Nigeria to emerge not as a country working in concert with Ghana, but as a competing country against Ghana. All right, so now let me move to a second memo. And these memos are relatively long, so I'm not reading the entire document. But as I said, I'm going to post the links at the end, and then patrons, you'll be welcome to go and read the entire memo via those links. This one is written by William Trimble, Director of Office of West African Affairs, and is to the Assistant Secretary of State for Africa, G. Menon Williams. And this is dated February 11, 1964. Quote, by his present actions, Nkrumah is daily rendering our position in Ghana more difficult. He sees us as an ideal scapegoat to cover his domestic shortcomings and a handy whipping boy to promote his extreme brand of Pan-Africanism. So in other words, a leader who's promoting the unification of all Africa together is being accused of practicing an extreme brand of Pan-Africanism. In contrast to his leftist advisors, it is doubtful, however, that he wishes us to leave. He probably desires to retain the Volta aid and also some connection with the West to give him a posture of neutrality. But his present conduct can only lead to circumstances under which our position could well become untenable. And the Volta Project was one of Nkrumah's great dreams, which in fact he did realize before he was overthrown, which was to build the hydroelectric project and the Volta River Dam, which was to electrify and provide energy for industrialization in Ghana. And the United States and the World Bank and Kaiser Aluminum was also involved in financing that operation. And Kaiser was also to build an aluminum factory. And in fact, Ghana today, decades after Nkrumah's demise, benefits from that great project that Nkrumah was able to undertake before he was overthrown. And then this document goes on to suggest some strategies of countering Nkrumah. And let me jump to another part toward the end. Although Nkrumah's leftward progress cannot be checked or reversed, it could be slowed down by a well-conceived and executed action program. Measures which we might take against Nkrumah would have to be carefully selected in order not to weaken pro-Western elements in Ghana or adversely affect our prestige and influence elsewhere on the continent. U.S. pressure, if appropriately applied, could induce a chain reaction, eventually leading to Nkrumah's downfall. Chances of success would be greatly enhanced if the British could be induced to act in concert with us. Failure to act can only result in a further deterioration of the situation to the point where we may feel compelled to leave Ghana, thereby facilitating the chance of Soviet success. So, policy primarily is conducted toward undermining Nkrumah's attempts to unify Africa and undermining any increase in contact and relations between Ghana in this case, but African countries generally, and what was then the Soviet Union. And then there's a summary of some of the activities that can be undertaken. And because I have other documents I'd like to read, I'll just go through it very quickly. And some of them including the delay of the return of Ambassador William Mahoney, his return to Ghana, the award of a Medal of Freedom to a Ghanaian named Edgar Player, who was someone who had actually secured the U.S. flag when demonstrators outside the U.S. Embassy, Ghanaians, had tried to pull down the U.S. flag from the U.S. Embassy. So one of the suggestions was to award this individual a Medal of Freedom. And another was to encourage Edgar Kaser, who was the CEO of Kaiser Aluminum, to pay a number of visits to Nkrumah, and obviously to indicate to him that the financing of the Volta Project would be jeopardized if Nkrumah did not change his position in terms of what the U.S. perceived as a relationship which was not in the Western camp. And then here's where we get the clear indication of how the World Bank has been used to economically blackmail African countries as well. The World Bank's official name is the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, or IBRD. So let me read the reference to IBRD in this document. The recommendation should be made to the IBRD, preferably through the Secretary of the Treasury, that it send a team to Ghana to study the desirability of continuing its support of the Volta Project in the light of Ghana's adverse financial situation. So obviously, the determination is not based on whatever is happening with Ghana's economy, but this was a political decision because the U.S. had decided to undermine and to overthrow Nkrumah's government. And now we see the World Bank, which is financing this project. The U.S. now wants it to take a role in this mission of regime change in Ghana. And it also called for a slowdown of disbursements of loans that had already been approved for the same project through the USAID, through the Exim Bank, Export-Import Bank of the United States, which is also a U.S. government entity, as well as the IBRD. And it says, quote, because of the IBRD's direct involvement in the project, it should be informed in advance of any such action. So in other words, this is not even a secret. The World Bank is actually informed that this is the mission to overthrow Nkrumah, and we want you to be on board. And of course, as the major shareholder of the World Bank, the United States can and has in the past undertaken that process. And then let me just read one final point before I go to another document. Psychological warfare. Quote, intensive efforts should be made through psychological warfare and other means to diminish support from Nkrumah within Ghana and nurture the conviction among the Ghanaian people that their country's welfare and independence necessitate his removal, referring to Kwame Nkrumah, of course. Okay, let me move to another document. This is March 23, 1964, a telegram from Ambassador William Mahoney to the State Department for President Johnson and for U.S. Secretary of State Dean Rusk. It's long. I wish I could read the entire document, but as I said, I will post the link. Let me just read one part. Quote, there's no doubt that his leanings are to the left, and he pays more attention to his leftist advisors. However, he has many well-trained government officials who help put brakes on to some extent. He's armed with socialist doctrine, although when I pointed out communist failures in agriculture and otherwise, and that British and all European socialist leaders were becoming much more pragmatic in policy, it seemed to sink in a bit. I assured him we accepted non-alignment, but only true non-alignment. What we could not accept was in fact support of communist bloc through his press and otherwise. So in other words, an African country that's supposed to be independent and sovereign being told these are the countries you cannot have normal relations with. We discussed African unity, and he stressed freedom for all Africa. I explained we accepted Wilson's position that freedom was indivisible, referring not just to Africa, but elsewhere, particularly Eastern Europe, still enslaved by Moscow. And Wilson, I imagine, is a reference to Harold Wilson, who was the Prime Minister of Britain at that time. Let me just read from the end of the same document. In sum, Nkrumah has been on his good behavior during my visit, and it will require constant effort and skill to prevent too many and too deep relapses. There is, of course, no fundamental change in his beliefs. I mean, the tone alone is like an African leader being treated like a small child who would relapse into his own independent free thought. That is why it's so remarkable when you read the words so explicitly just put out in these documents. Of course, we knew what was happening, but you get a better sense when you read the words used by the people involved in regime change. And this is what these documents provide. Let me read from another document. This is from February 25, 1966, and it's from the Department of State to the embassy in Ghana. Actually, let me save this because this is now after the coup d'etat. So I want to save that for toward the end. Let me read from another one, actually. This is after a meeting which involved the Director of Central Intelligence, CIA, John McCone, and the ambassador to Ghana, William Mahoney, and the deputy chief Africa division of the CIA, whose name is not declassified, so his name is not on this document. And this is March 11, 1965, about a year, slightly under a year before the coup d'etat. And this is the notes by somebody who took the notes. Quote, coup d'etat plot, Ghana. While Ambassador Mahoney felt that popular opinion was running strongly against Nkrumah and the economy of the country was in a precarious state, of course, thanks to what role the US was playing in that, he was not convinced that the coup d'etat, now being planned by Acting Police Commissioner Harley, and Harley's full name is John Kofi Harley, and Generals Otu and Ankara. General Otu's full name is Stephen Otu, and General Joseph Ankara, would necessarily take place. He did feel, however, that one way or another, Nkrumah would be out within a year. Okay, so this document also is long, but as I said, I will post the link at the end of this podcast. I just want to try to get through as many documents as possible. This is another document from Robert Comer, National Security Council staff, to McGeorge Bundy, who was President Johnson's national security advisor. And this is dated May 27, 1965, a couple of months before the coup d'etat. FYI, we may have a pro-Western coup in Ghana soon. Certain key military and police figures have been planning one for some time, and Ghana's deteriorating economic condition may provide the spark. The plotters are keeping us briefed, and state thinks we're more on the inside than the British. While we are not directly involved, I am told, supposedly, we and other Western countries, including France, have been helping to set up the situation by ignoring Nkrumah's pleas for economic aid. And at the end of the document, all in all, looks good. Yep. Okay, let's go to the document number 6, and then I have 2 more after that. This is a telegram from the Department of State to the embassy in Ghana, dated February 25, 1966. Embassy's prompt, comprehensive, and perceptive reporting of coup events much appreciated by Department. Department fully cognizant that pressures for early recognition of new regime will mount. Before deciding how best to cope with the question, would prefer first-hand reaction of some other African countries. We wish avoid appearing overzealous by acting too quickly, thus lending credence to inevitable charges that U.S. masterminded coup. All right, I will also post the link to that. Let me go to the 7th document, and then I'll have one more. And this is a memo from Robert Comer, who by this time is President Johnson's acting special assistant for national security affairs, and it's to President Johnson. And it's dated March 12, 1966. Quote, the coup in Ghana is another example of a fortuitous windfall, as if the U.S. had nothing to do with it. It's almost comical had it not been something so tragic. Nkrumah was doing more to undermine our interests than any other Black African. In reaction to his strongly pro-communist leanings, the new military regime is almost pathetically pro-Western. And you will get an indication of how pathetically pro-Western it was when I read this final document now. And this one is a memo prepared for President Johnson to prepare him for a meeting with General Ankara, the leader of who became the leader of Ghana after the coup d'etat. And it's prepared by National Security Advisor Walt Rostow, dated October 9, 1967. Quote, you're meeting with Chairman Ankara of Ghana for Tuesday, October 10 at 12:15 p.m. Scheduled 12:15 p.m. Informal arrival at diplomatic entrance. No remarks. 12:20 to 1. Alone with advisors standing by in cabinet room. 1 p.m. White House lunch. So let me just read briefly now from this to show how sycophantic General Nkrumah was. Quote, this is primarily a courtesy call after Nkrumah's visit to Expo. He's fiercely pro-American and wants to have a close personal relation with you. His National Liberation Council has made real progress cleaning up the mess left by Nkrumah. They've introduced an unpopular austerity program to try to make the country solvent. They've turned Ghana away from a mischievous and blustering foreign policy and become good neighbors toward the rest of Africa, as well as the West. Ghana is now a voice for reason and moderation in the UN and the Organization of African Unity. The general's only problem with our policy on Vietnam is that it is too soft to suit him. He may well ask you why we are not using nuclear weapons. Yes, that is the kind of regime the US imposed on Ghana and killed Nkrumah's vision for African unity, United States of Africa, African industrialization. That is all for today, sisters and brothers, comrades. I'll post the link to these documents at the end of the podcast. Be strong, be healthy, remain Pan-African. See you next week.